In the heart of a winter, no one dared to remember when even the wind had forgotten how to be kind. A kitten and a puppy waited to die. But someone was walking toward them, not with riches, not with armies, but with a warmth older than time. This is the story of the day Jesus walked through snow, not to preach to crowds, not to raise the dead, but to save two forgotten souls with paws. And it all began with silence. There are two kinds of cold, the kind that makes your fingers numb and the kind that makes your heart quiet. This was both. Snow had been falling for 5 days, thick, slow flakes like pieces of sky drifting down, covering everything in white silence. The little village, far from the cities and noise of the world, had fallen into stillness. No carts moved, no children played. Even the animals had vanished into barns or burrows, but not all of them. Beneath the broken edge of an old firewood shed, a kitten lay curled into herself. She had no name. She had no home. Her fur was thin, patched in places from hunger or frost. Her little body barely moved, except for the soft rise and fall of her chest. Not far away, on the side of the market road where wagons used to pass, a small cardboard box trembled. Inside it, barely visible beneath a scrap of cloth, a puppy shivered. The ribbon tied around his neck was red once. Now it was the color of wet rust. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He had stopped hoping anyone would hear him. 2 small lives, 2 fading lights, and yet something was coming. Or rather, someone. The snow had its own voice. If you listened closely, really listened, you could hear the whisper of it. Not loud, not sharp, just the sound of falling, of drifting, of forgetting. That was the kind of morning it was. White and hushed, a sky like smoke, a ground that didn't remember grass. Nothing moved, nothing dared to, until a foot pressed gently into the snow. Then another, boots worn and dusted with years, a cloak, heavy and brown, brushing against the whiteness like a shadow with shape. The figure moved slowly, but with purpose, as though every step knew exactly where to land, even if the path was hidden beneath layers of frozen silence. No one noticed him at first. People in the village kept to themselves in winter. Doors closed early. Fires were small. The baker lit his oven in the dark and never looked out his window. The shepherds stayed near the hills, counting the quiet rather than their sheep. But the man walked on unnoticed until he reached the edge of the market square. There he paused, his head tilted slightly, as though he heard something that no one else could. Not a cry, not a bark, but something quieter. A heartbeat. 2 of them. He turned. The kitten hadn't moved for hours. Her breathing had slowed. Her body was stiff. Snowflakes clung to her fur like forgotten prayers. She didn't see the man walk up. She didn't hear the crunch of his steps. But when his hand reached down and gently brushed the frost from her back, she stirred. Not much, just a blink, just a twitch of her tiny ear. But enough. The man smiled, not with his mouth, but with something softer, something deep behind his eyes. He scooped her up without a word, pressing her close to his chest beneath his cloak. She did not resist. She did not meow. She simply lay there, and for the first time in days, her body stopped shaking. A few streets away, the puppy, Moss, was dreaming. At least it felt like dreaming. His box had collapsed inward a bit from the weight of snow. The wind had slipped through the seams, stealing warmth. The cloth inside was damp. His paws were too cold to move, but he dreamed still of a hand, a voice, something he once knew. The man found him like that, eyes closed, barely breathing. He didn't knock on doors or ask permission. He just knelt, reached in, and lifted Moss as though he weighed nothing at all. The puppy let out a tiny, involuntary sigh, and the man whispered, "Shh, I know." He tucked the puppy under his other arm, inside the warmth of his cloak. One bundle on each side, the kitten, the dog, 2 stories, 1 heart. And then, still silent, he walked on. From the upstairs window of the bakery, a child finally noticed. "Papa," the girl said, her voice hushed. "Who's that man?" The baker barely glanced. "Stranger, passing through." The girl watched the cloak disappear around the corner. "His eyes were kind," she whispered. Her father didn't answer, but later that night, when the fire burned low and the wind howled louder than usual, he found himself thinking about that moment and wondering just who had walked through their village without leaving footprints behind. It wasn't a house. It wasn't even a barn. It was a hollow between 2 rocks, part of a hillside just outside the village, hidden from the road and sheltered from the wind. Moss and frost clung to the stones, but inside it was dry, bare, quiet. The man laid the kitten down first. She opened one eye, just for a moment, then closed it again. Not out of fear, but out of something deeper. Trust. He unwrapped a piece of cloth from his satchel, coarse but warm, and laid it out beside her. Then, with a motion as natural as breathing, he reached into the pouch at his side and pulled out a small, smooth stone. He held it in his hand, eyes soft, lips silent. He didn't speak out loud. He didn't need to. And then, the stone glowed, not like fire, not bright, not flickering, just warm. The air around it shimmered faintly. The cold pulled back, and for the first time in days, the shelter wasn't freezing. The kitten stretched one paw, curled into the cloth, and sighed. Moss whimpered gently as the man set him down next to her. He blinked. Slowly. Unsure if he was awake or dreaming. But when the warmth reached him, when the cold finally stepped away, his ears relaxed. His body softened. The man sat back. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He simply watched. Watched the kitten's breathing slow into something steady. Watched the puppy's tail flick just once, barely there. Watched the snow outside fall without sound. It's easy to miss miracles when they don't come with thunder. No angels sang, no stars fell, but in a hollow in the hills, 2 lives were saved, quietly, gently, without a crowd to cheer or a priest to bless the moment. Just a man, a warmth, and a love so old it didn't need explaining. Later that night, the girl from the bakery came down the hill. She had bundled herself in too many layers, her small boots barely keeping up with her steps. She didn't know why she had left her house, only that she had seen his eyes earlier, and something inside her felt pulled. She didn't know where she was going, until she saw the light, not firelight, something softer, something still. She peeked inside the hollow and gasped, not from fear, from wonder. There he was, the man, sitting with his back against the rock, one hand resting beside the glowing stone. The animals were curled beside him, warm and asleep. He looked up, and his smile was more like sunrise than expression. "Would you like to come in?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it reached all the way into her chest. She nodded, crawled in, sat down beside him. "Are they yours?" she asked, nodding toward the kitten and the puppy. His answer was soft. "They were lost. Now they're not." She didn't understand it fully then. Not until years later, when people whispered of the man who healed the blind, who walked on water, who raised the dead. She'd remember this moment, this shelter, this stone, this silence, and she'd say, before the world knew who he was already saving lives no one else could see. The next morning, the village woke to a strange feeling. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds, and the wind had picked up, rattling shutters and sending loose snow swirling down the streets. But something in the air was different. Softer, lighter, like the first breath after holding it too long. Word traveled fast in a small place, even in winter. Did you see the stranger? He was carrying a dog and a cat, right through the snow. They say he made a fire that didn't burn wood. The baker's daughter, the one who had followed him the night before, told her friends what she'd seen in the hollow. A glowing stone, a warmth that didn't come from flame, and two animals safe and sleeping. Skeptics scoffed, of course. Cold winds breed cold hearts. But others, those who remembered kindness, or who had ever felt the sting of loneliness, wondered quietly. Could the stranger be more than a man? Could he be something miraculous? As the day passed, small changes began to ripple through the village. The blacksmith found himself humming as he worked, something he hadn't done in weeks. The old widow across the street opened her shutters to let in the pale light. Children who had stayed inside all winter came out, their laughter muffled by scarves, but bright as sparks. The puppy and kitten, now wrapped warmly and fed with milk brought by the baker's daughter, began to recover. Their eyes grew brighter, their steps steadier. The village watched this tiny revival with wonder, and some, for the first time in a long time, dared to hope. That evening, the stranger returned to the hollow. This time, a few villagers quietly followed him, curious but respectful. He welcomed them with the same soft smile. "Why do you follow me?" he asked. One of the villagers, a quiet woman with eyes like storm clouds, spoke. "Because you brought warmth where there was none." The stranger nodded. Warmth comes from many places, but sometimes it begins with care for the smallest among us. He reached into his cloak again and pulled out a small bundle. Inside were bandages, fresh and clean. "Even the smallest wounds," he said, "need tending. Even the coldest hearts need kindness." The story of the night the stranger saved the abandoned animals spread beyond the village, carried by travelers, and whispered in markets. People began to see him less as a stranger and more as a messenger of hope. The winter grew colder still, but the village grew warmer. And two little lives, saved by a man whose name many would come to know as Jesus, became a symbol of a love that even the harshest cold could not touch. The snow kept falling, but it no longer felt like a prison. Instead, it was a blanket, soft, silent, and full of promise. The village began to change in ways small and extraordinary. People who had once kept their doors shut against the cold started gathering by fires, sharing stories, and offering food to neighbors who had little. The kitten, now named Grace by the baker's daughter, stretched her legs and explored the warmth of the cottage where she had been taken in. Her fur grew thick and shiny, and her eyes sparkled like the morning sun on fresh snow. The puppy, Moss, became a playful shadow, following the stranger wherever he went, his tail wagging, his steps sure and steady. The man, Jesus, did not seek attention. He moved quietly through the village, healing unseen wounds and planting seeds of hope. One day, as the wind howled outside, he gathered the villagers near the hollow, the place where the first miracle had quietly bloomed. With gentle hands, he took the glowing stone once more, and this time, the warmth spread beyond the hollow, filling every home and heart. No one could explain how it happened, only that the cold was less fierce and the nights were less lonely. Children laughed, old wounds healed, and the village's heart began to beat stronger. And in the middle of it all, Grace and Moss, once lost and forgotten, were living proof that love could thaw even the deepest winter. As winter deepened, the village faced nights colder than ever. The snowdrifts grew high, and the biting wind howled like a restless spirit. But the warmth that Jesus had brought into the hollow, into their hearts, never faded. The villagers learned what the stranger already knew. Kindness, like a small flame, could survive the harshest storm. One evening, gathered around a fire in the village square, Jesus spoke softly to those who would listen. "Love is not just for those who can repay it," he said. "It is for the lost, the broken, the forgotten. The cold is fierce, but it can never conquer a heart that chooses to care." Grace the kitten curled up on the lap of the baker's daughter, purring contentedly. Moss lay at Jesus' feet, his eyes bright and trusting. A silence fell, a quiet understanding. That night, the children of the village dreamed of new beginnings. They dreamed of fields where animals roamed free, where no one was ever abandoned, where even the smallest life was cherished. The adults, too, felt that quiet hope. And when the morning came, the world looked just a little brighter. Winter's grip was firm, yet within the village, a new warmth blossomed, one born of trust, hope, and shared stories. Jesus moved among the people with a quiet presence, listening more than speaking, healing more by example than by grand gestures. Grace, the kitten, became a symbol of fragile resilience. She would sometimes chase snowflakes falling softly from the sky, her tiny paws leaving delicate prints in the frost. Moss, once trembling and lost, now greeted everyone with boundless energy and a joyful bark that echoed through the village lanes. Children loved to gather around Jesus, who would smile and tell them stories, simple tales of love and kindness, of miracles that could happen in the smallest acts. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the snowy roofs, Jesus sat with the baker's daughter and a small group of villagers. "Why do you stay?" one man asked, his voice rough from cold and doubt. Jesus looked at the group, then at Grace, curled in the girl's lap, and Moss, wagging his tail by their feet. "I stay because love is alive," he answered softly. "Because even in the coldest places, it can grow. And when it does, it changes everything." The villagers nodded, feeling something stir deep inside, a spark of hope they had almost forgotten. That night, under a sky studded with stars, Grace and Moss slept peacefully, their breaths slow and even. And Jesus, watching over them, whispered a prayer, a blessing not just for the animals, but for every heart waiting to be saved. The days began to lengthen. The snow, once thick and unyielding, softened at the edges. The frozen earth sighed beneath the thaw. In the village, signs of life stirred gently. Small green shoots pushed bravely through the melting snow. The river, once a solid ribbon of ice, began to murmur and flow again. Grace stretched in the sunlight, filtering through the cottage window. Her fur shone with health and warmth. Moss bounded outside, chasing the first brave butterflies that dared to flutter in the early spring breeze. Jesus walked among the villagers, his presence like the gentle warmth of the sun, coaxing life from the cold ground beneath their feet. The villagers, inspired by the miracle of survival they'd witnessed, began to open their hearts wider. Neighbors shared food. Families welcomed those who had none. The village square filled with laughter and light, where there had once only been silence. The baker's daughter knelt by a small patch of earth outside the hollow, planting seeds with care. "Hope," she whispered, "is something you grow." One evening, as the stars blinked awake in the cool sky, Jesus gathered the village for a simple celebration, not of grandeur, but of life renewed. He spoke softly. "The cold will come again, as it always does. But remember this, in the smallest acts of kindness, in the quiet miracles of each day, you hold the power to warm the world." Grace purred in his lap. Moss rested his head gently against the girl's feet, and the village, once lost in winter's shadow, glowed with the promise of spring. Spring's warmth spilled beyond the village, carrying with it a gentle invitation to the world, to love, to heal, to hope. Jesus traveled along dusty roads, through towns both bustling and forgotten. Wherever he went, he carried the lessons of the hollow, the story of a rescued kitten and puppy, the quiet power of kindness in the coldest times. He healed wounds, not just of the body, but of the spirit. He fed those who hungered for more than bread. He listened to those whose voices had long been ignored. In one small town, a mother wept beside her child. The child was weak, the illness cold and cruel. Jesus knelt beside them, placing his hands gently upon the child's forehead. Warmth spread like a ripple in still water. The child's breathing steadied. The mother's tears became smiles. In another village, an old man, once bitter and alone, found himself touched by a stranger's compassion. Jesus shared a meal, listened to stories of loss, and reminded the man that even the hardest hearts could soften. Back in the village where Grace and Moss were once lost, word of these miracles spread. The baker's daughter often looked to the sky, remembering the man who had saved 2 tiny lives in the coldest winter. She knew the story was bigger than her village. It was a story for all who ever felt forgotten. Jesus' message was simple, but profound. Love is the greatest miracle of all.